and it's crooked. That's what it is, it's crooked. Who needs therapy? Before I went, I was positive I knew the answer. Crazy people, weak people, broken people, not men. So, women? And I'm blanking on all of it, even though I talked about it not that long ago. And they have a teenage daughter. Every once in a while, the New York comes out. Hi everybody, it's Audrey and welcome back to Chapter and Converse. Today we're gonna do my May reading wrap up, and I was like hyper distracted this month, yet managed to read 8 books, which I was surprised about when I actually started to count them up. But I will say I do feel like I was really like in and out of some of the books and maybe didn't fully appreciate some of them. So there's one book that I already kind of want to reread, and I may actually get the audiobook from my library and redo it. But I had a good reading month. I'm looking at the pile, which is why I keep looking down. But I did overall have a really good reading month, and let's just talk about the books. So the first book I want to talk about, I actually mentioned in the last book haul I did, and it's The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. And I read this as a buddy read with Lindsay from Lindsay's Little Library, and thank God we read this together because this book is so good but so weird. And I said it in my other video, but if you missed it, what I will tell you is if you're gonna read this book, which I 100% think you should, definitely either read it with a friend or find a friend who's already read it that you can talk to about it, because this was one of those books where I felt the constant need to be like, okay, what about this? What about this? What about this? So we had such a great time reading this together, and it's like weird in all the best ways and unexpected in all the best ways. So I'm only gonna read a little snippet of the inside flap because I also feel like this is 100% a book you wanna go into blind and just trust the process. So trust the writer, trust the story. So this one says, you won't believe what's inside the last house on Needless Street. This is the story of a murderer, a stolen child, revenge. This is the story of Ted, who lives with his daughter Lauren and his cat Olivia in an ordinary house at the end of an ordinary street. All of these things are true, and yet some of them are lies. You think you know what's inside the last house on Needless Street. You think you've read this story before. In the dark forest at the end of Needless Street, something lies buried, but it's not what you think. I loved it. I really did. I will fully admit there were points where I was kind of like, I'm giving up on this book because I don't know what's happening here, and I don't like to be frustrated. But again, talking through things with Lindsay really kept us sort of on point together, and at the end of the day, I loved it. So huge points to the author for the creativity of it, and the story and the twists and things I didn't see coming, and I just had such a great time with it. So go all in. Right now, this book is only available in the UK, so this is actually the UK cover from Book Depository. I want to say it comes out in the US in September. I'll let you know down below if you want to wait for the US edition, but yeah, this book was fantastic. So if you guys have been following my bookshelf tour, unhaul, discovering books I didn't realize I had, then Are You Sleeping might be familiar. And this is by Kathleen Barber. And this is one of those books that I bought a long time ago, and obviously something about it was appealing to me, but then I sort of forgot about it. And when I was doing the tour, I was like, wait, this is a book with multiple timelines and a podcast and mysteries in the past and mysteries in the present. Like, why am I not reading this? And this book has since been reissued as the title Truth Be Told, and there is a multi-part series on Apple TV based on the book with Octavia Spencer and Aaron Paul and a whole mess of other amazing people. Mekhi Phifer is in it, Michael Beach is in it. Why am I blanking on one of the main characters? I will pop her name down below, but I'll talk about that series in a bit because I'm only a few episodes into it, but let's talk about the book first. I really enjoyed this book. So this book surrounds a family, and 13 years ago, the father, who was like a well-known professor in town, beloved, all the things, gets murdered in his house. And one of his teenage twin daughters witnessed the murder and is the key witness in putting their neighbor into prison. And their neighbor is still in prison today, But in present day, there is a podcaster who is revisiting this story and doesn't think that the neighbor is guilty of this crime. And she reopens the case and puts it back into the limelight, which of course messes with everybody's life. So after their father was killed, their mom wound up leaving and joining a cult and basically abandoning the twin daughters, and they went to live with their aunt. And as you can imagine, a lot of family drama, a lot of family strife. And the sister Josie, who is not the one who witnessed the murder, just sort of went away, reinvented herself. And she is in a great relationship, and she basically just never told her partner that any of this happened to her and who she is, and has lied about her entire backstory. And when her mom dies, she has to go back to her hometown and deal with it, and deal with the fact that she never actually told Caleb about her history, and never really mentioned that this super popular podcast, which is taken off a la Serial, is actually about her and her family. So all sorts of things start to explode. So we get some mixed media in here with the podcast, and there's like some Reddit threads and Twitter posts and things like that, Twitter tweets that are in here. And it's all the things that I love. So mystery in the past, mystery in the present, return to the hometown, the reluctant return home, mixed media, podcast, just all the things. And I really enjoyed this book. So I feel like this is very much a story about sisters and family, daughters, motherhood, and it's very much about the mystery, and we do focus a lot on that, but there's such a core family story to this as well. And I sort of like unintentionally have read some sister books lately too, like some family drama books too, and I'm having a really good time with them. So I'm really glad I picked this up. I mean, you can see again, you know, my dog earring is like a sign of how much I enjoy a book, but I would pick this one up. I really think it's good. I would say there wasn't as much podcast as I was expecting, but I'm okay with it because it worked, because again, it really is a great story of the exploration of family and secrets. And I think facing the truth of your family and your history and your past. And I really, really enjoyed it. So highly recommend. Again, it's called Truth Be Told now. So I feel like I have like a fabulous old copy of this. And then if you've seen the TV show, so I want to say like 3.5 episodes into it, and they're like hour-long-ish kind of episodes. It is a totally different story. So if you've seen the show, you can pick this up, and I think you're gonna have a completely different experience. And I'm not mad about it being different, but I'm glad I read the book first. But the TV show, and I will circle back with you guys after I finished it completely, but it really focuses on Poppy, who is the podcaster, and it's told completely from her perspective, whereas this is told from Josie, one of the sisters' perspectives. And there's just, the core of the story is the same in that their father was killed. One of them, you know, accused the neighbor of doing it, but so far that's about the only thing that's the same. So we have a whole built out family and a whole built out life for the podcaster Poppy, which is really interesting. And then we get to see her meeting with the neighbor who's in prison. And I think like in the TV show, there's a 20-year time frame from the murder to present day, whereas in the book it's 13 years. So it's a much different experience so far. It's definitely way darker, way more violent, way grittier than the book is. And again, not mad about it, but to me it's very much like two different pieces of art. And I know Kathleen Barber is a producer on it. It's fully inspired by her book, but they've definitely taken it into a new direction. So I'll keep you guys posted on it. Liking it, but completely different. The next book I want to talk about is one that I totally loved, and it's Finlay, Donovan is Killing It by Elle Casamano. And this book was just like a delight. Like, I don't even know how else to describe it. I had such a great time with this book. There is already a sequel coming out. They've already released the book cover of it. Like, if I can pre-order it now, I think I'm gonna pre-order it now. But this book was compared to Dead to Me the Netflix show with Christina Applegate and Linda Cardellini. And that is the most spot on comparison that I have seen. So if you loved that show, no questions asked. And if you haven't seen that show, trust when I say you will enjoy this book. So this is about Finlay, and she is a divorced mom of 2 young kids, and her charming, eye roll, ex-husband cheated on her with the realtor who he is now engaged to, and they basically like live down the street, and she is sharing custody of her kids and is forced to deal with him and the horrible realtor, and the fact that basically she has a stack of bills that she can't pay. She's she's a semi-successful writer who is struggling to come up with a new book and a new story idea, and basically like the walls are closing in on her. She can't afford the house. The kids are just like more than she can handle on some mornings. Her husband has fired the nanny because, again, charming, lovely man that he is, and desperation is basically the sign that is hanging over Finlay's head right now. So early in the book, she goes to meet with her agent to talk about the fact that she is past her deadline on her book and doesn't have an idea, and she writes mysteries and thrillers. So her and her agent are talking about a book idea over lunch at Panera Bread, and a woman overhears them and mistakenly takes that conversation for the fact that Finlay is a hit woman. And that woman reaches out to Finlay because she wants to hire her to kill her husband. And Finlay's like, but no, like you totally misunderstood and I'm not. No, that's not who I am. And the woman's like, I'll give you 50 grand to kill my husband. And Finlay is desperate as all get out. So what's a woman to do? What's a mom to do? So this just takes some really fun, wild turns, and she writes mystery thriller, but real life is very different, and that 50 grand is looking pretty dang tempting right about now. And there's just such a wonderful relationship that we get to see between Finlay and her nanny, Vero. Love them together, obsessed. Obsessed with them separately, obsessed with them together. They're such a great female duo. And again, think dead to me. And I just loved it. I absolutely loved it. I read this super quickly. I was totally invested in it. It's funny at times. It's snarky, it's witty. There's like some dark comedy to it and dark humor to it. There's just all sorts of stuff happening in this book. But I love Finlay. I just think she's such a great character. I'm 99% sure this is coming to the small screen as like a series. And I think it's great. I just think it's absolutely great. What a fun idea. And there's, you know, because she's the mom, she's got the 2 young kids, so I think there's some good mom humor in this. I'm not a mom of 2 young kids, but I feel like I could feel her pain and understanding what some of my friends go through trying to juggle the kids and juggle life and juggle everything else. So I was 100% here for this book. Loved it. Fast, quick, fun read. So I read a couple nonfiction books also, and the first one is Don't Keep Your Day Job by Cathy Heller, and this is How to Turn Your Passion into a Career. And Cathy Heller actually has a podcast, which I didn't realize when I picked up this book. And I did like part of it on audiobook from my library and then real book right here. So you guys know, if you follow me, that writing is 100% my passion, and it is something that I am working on but not working on enough lately because life is just a lot, as I think a lot of people can relate to. But it's a lot of just good, encouraging advice and like some good pearls of wisdom. And it was kind of like the rah-rah, you got this, like your dream is worth your time, your dream is worth your focus, your dream is worth your passion kind of stuff that I needed to hear. So I really enjoyed this book. I will say it definitely goes into like a more entrepreneurial advice piece if you're really trying to start a business, which I'm not obviously trying to do, in the same sense of like I'm not trying to open a store, or there's like people who, you know, have turned their passions for baking into careers, you know, people who have created like online platforms and become real coaches and professional development and things like that. So not 100% applicable to me, but at the same time still really good nuggets in this. And then there's a lot of quotes from famous people who have been on her podcast, which I also started listening to a bit. So there's just some great nuggets from Jenna Fisher, from Gretchen Rubin, Jen Sincero, who I love, who wrote the Badass series. And I just really enjoyed it. So again, if you're looking for just some good advice and some motivation and some encouragement on how to stay focused on what your passion is. And it's also at the same time, like it's not saying like, quit your job today and go figure it out for a year. Like it's real concrete advice with a little bit of tough love kind of thrown in there. So kind of in a Jensen Cheryl kind of a way, and there's some levity to it too. But I really enjoyed it. She narrates the podcast. She obviously narrates her podcast, but she narrates the audiobook too, which was really good. So just good, easy, digestible, helpful information, and one of those books that there's good quotes in it and I'll go back to and I'll reference it. So I'm glad I read it. So the other self-help-ish kind of book that I listened to is Get Out of Your Own Way by Dave Hollis. And I borrowed this from my library, and I had a curiosity about this since it came out, but not curious enough to like gobble it up or go out and get it right away. And I'm glad I didn't, because it was sort of like, meh. And in all fairness, I'm not like a huge Dave Hollis fan. Like, I'm sort of like neutral on Dave. And you guys know, if you've watched me, like I really enjoyed Rachel Hollis's first 2 books, and I feel like so much with them has changed. Like, I feel like since their divorce and like a lot of things that have come out, I definitely have some different feelings about them and feelings about their brand and their message. And reading this book, which was published before they announced their divorce, and I'm not like mad at them that they got divorced, but so much of their brand and their sort of advice surrounded the fact that they had this wonderful, successful, happy, you know, marriage. And not to say that that can't change, but I think there was a lack of authenticity to what they were preaching when all this stuff was going on behind the scenes. And a lot of his book talks about the authenticity of their relationship. So it's a little bit hard to swallow that, knowing what I know now, if that makes sense. So this book is set up the exact same way as Girl Wash Your Face, and it's lies that men tell themselves and lies that Dave told himself and how he's like come out on the other side. So again, I'm being cynical as all get out, but it feels like a money grab to me, and it feels just like formulaic. And I think, and again, I don't listen to Dave a ton on his podcast. I've listened to it when he's had people that he's interviewing that I'm interested in, but I feel like he's become more authentic since their divorce. And this, like, I feel like he held back and didn't quite go anywhere. Like, there's nothing new in this, and there's part of it that feels a little bit braggy, like he had the major Disney job and was pitching to Johnny Depp's people, and how much money he made and how easy it was for him, and he basically was like there at a really great time and blah 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 blah, like yay me. But there's like a few things in it where it's like cringe. And one of the things he talks about is therapy, and there's like this loose quote where he's like, he didn't believe in therapy and he poo-pooed it and he looked down on it and all this other kind of stuff. And he says, who needs therapy? Before I went, I was positive I knew the answer. Crazy people, weak people, broken people, not men. So women? Just was like, ew. So some cringy things like that. And then again, if you read Girl Wash Your Face, there's this chapter about how they met, and Rachel basically tells the story about how she was dating this guy who treated her like crap. And then at the end of the chapter, we find out it was Dave. Okay. And I mean, hey, I'm not saying I didn't date bad people when I was 19 or allowed someone to treat me like crap, but he like writes a rebuttal chapter to that. And then like she writes a chapter about the struggle of them adopting, which is real stuff. And then he writes a chapter on the same thing. So it goes hand in hand with her book in a lot of ways. And he like talks about his drinking problem, which I appreciate his transparency about that. But it's also just like, so I quit drinking and I started working out, and you know, my friends helped encourage me to drink water instead. And it's like, I feel like it's not that easy. I mean, anyone who's dealt with any kind of an issue, no matter what it is or what degree of it, I find it hard to believe like it was just sort of that easy. So again, the book talks all about their wonderful relationship and their wonderful marriage, and I would suspect at the time even he was writing this, things were already falling apart just based on sort of the timeline of things that people have put together. So all that to say, there's far better books out there. Maybe if you're new to the self-help category, this might be helpful in some kind of way, but I think there's other stuff out there that's way better. I'm glad I listened to it in the sense of like, we're done, and I got it from the library, but I would not recommend this book to people. A book that I would recommend is Mary Jane by Jessica Anya Blau. And I talked about this in one of my book hauls also, and I feel like I was partway through it when I was talking about it. I really loved this. So this is an arc that I got from Custom House, an imprint of William Morrow. So thank you, thank you. And I'm so glad I had a chance to read this book before it came out and read it, period. So this book definitely has like some good 70s nostalgia vibes to it, and it's set in the 70s outside of Baltimore, and we follow a 14-year-old girl named Mary Jane, and it's the summer, and she winds up getting this nanny job for a newish family that's moved in. And her mom is like super excited because the dad is a doctor and they live in this beautiful house, and her mom just thinks this is like gonna be the best job ever. And her parents, Mary Jane's parents, are kind of conservative, kind of totally 100% conservative. And Mary Jane takes on this nannying job for this family that is totally liberal, like the complete 180 from her family, and she loves it. And it is the story of that summer that she spends being their nanny. And it's very coming of age. It's very much sort of this eye-opening story about Mary Jane seeing sort of what else is out there in the world, and her exposure to this family who just takes her in literally with open arms, like hugs her and just embraces her. And she falls in love with this family and they fall in love with her. So Mary Jane is taking care of their young daughter, and then the father, who is a doctor, but he's actually a psychiatrist who works out of his home, has cleared his entire summer schedule because a famous rock star who is trying to kind of dry out and overcome his addictions is moving in with his movie star wife. And again, it's just Mary Jane having a front row seat to this whole new world, and her eyes are just sort of blown right, like wide open to things. So it's a little Almost Famous feel, a little Daisy Jones-ish kind of feel, and there's sex and drugs and rock and roll and like all the things, and it's just the summer that changes everything for her. So I had a great time with it. I have not read a coming of age book in a long time. I love the 70s vibes of it. I loved the atmosphere, the characters were good, the relationships that build. There were a few things, I would say, the mom, where I feel like I had like a couple unanswered questions, and I really liked her, but I feel like there were some things where I'm just sort of like, is this the direction we're going or no? So I feel like I have a couple of open questions on that. But a really good book. Again, great for summertime too, because this takes place over the course of a summer, and it's like a hot Baltimore summer, so you can like feel the heat big time in this one. But I had a great time with it. I thought it was a great read. I really enjoyed the writing. So again, highly recommend. Another book that I read, I actually listened to, which has podcast vibes in it, which is 1000% why I picked it up, is I Hope You're Listening by Tom Ryan. And this book had been on my radar for a little bit. And it was one of those books where it's a YA mystery, I would say. And we've got mystery in the past, mystery in the present, podcast elements. And it was one of those books where I was like, I'm gonna read it, I'm gonna read it, I'm gonna read it. And I finally read it because I'm kind of in a podcasty kind of a place again. I've never leave the podcast place, but I'm in it again. So this is about a girl named Dee, and she's 17, she lives in a small town, and 10 years ago, her best friend, Sibby, was abducted and never found. And they were in the woods playing together. And it has been this unsolved mystery of what happened to Sibby. And Dee, for all the understandable reasons, basically has survivor's guilt and has had a really hard time moving past this. So her and her family still live in the same town. They've moved out of the house that they lived in at the time. And one of the ways that Dee has found to cope is she has started this secret podcast where she tries to talk about unsolved missing persons cases and then lets the armchair detectives, the laptop detectives, help figure out what happened. And she tries to find the clues to lead the police to saving people. But no one knows that she's the one behind the podcast. She's not looking for any kind of credit. She's just trying to save other people because she couldn't save Sibby. And it kind of gives me, in a totally different way, a pump up the volume feel because Christian Slater had the secret radio show that nobody knew was him, but he was trying to expose some things and became super popular. And of course, Dee's podcast becomes super popular. So There is a news reporter who's trying to figure out who's behind the podcast, because in present day, a little girl in their town has gone missing. And not only is it reminiscent of what happened to Dee and Sibby, but the little girl who went missing actually lives in the house that Dee grew up in. So is it a coincidence? Is the person who abducted Sibby back? What's going on here? So there's a lot of questions about what happened in the past and what's going on in the present. And then to add a little bit more complication to Dee's life, there's a new family that moves in across the street, and they have a teenage daughter named Sarah, who not only is trying to find out who's behind the podcast because she's obsessed with it, but Dee also starts to get a crush on Sarah. So she's trying to kind of resist some romance because she doesn't want to be exposed as the person who's behind the podcast. So we have that complication as well. So I found it to be a really fun read. There's a lot of social commentary to this. There's a lot of layers to this book. The audiobook was great. I thought it was really well done. I liked the mystery. I didn't know what was going on. I wasn't sure who was behind what. There's just some good sort of twists and escalations. There's a lot of characters. There's a lot of who could it be? Who could it be? I love me some small town feels of things. I love me the multiple timelines. I love me a podcast. So I would totally recommend it. I thought it was really well done. It was a fun book. And yeah, it kind of like hit the spot. So I'm glad I finally picked it up. And the last book I want to talk about, which is 100% the book that I want to reread already, is The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. And this is a Jane Eyre retelling. And I read Jane Eyre in college and don't really remember much of it. So I'm not like a huge classics person. I'm trying to remedy that. Not because I'm trying to force myself to read classics, but because I feel like after I read Rebecca, I have such a different appreciation for so many books that took inspiration from it, from so many books that had little Easter eggs of Rebecca in it, as I think about all of these books I've read. And that 100% is the case with so many books. So whether or not you've read Jane Eyre, read this book because it's great. And I actually, of course, shocker, listened to tons of interviews with Rachel Hawkins about this book, and she talks about some of the non-spoilery things that are Easter eggs in this that she took from Jane Eyre, and I love that insight. Like, I feel like I want to be behind the curtain, and I'm having FOMO by not picking up on more probably what's in here. But this was a really fun read. So it's about a woman named Jane, and she is in Birmingham, Alabama, and she's a broke dog walker with a complicated past. And she basically walks dogs for super rich people in this fancy housing community. And there is a widow named Eddie who lives there, and Eddie and Jane kind of hit it off right away. And Eddie's wife died in a boating accident along with her best friend, who was the wife of another one of the neighbors. And that accident has raised some questions with some of the other neighbors, as does the fact that Eddie very quickly kind of moves on with Jane. So we have multiple points of view, we have multiple timelines, we have everybody keeping secrets, and I loved it. I totally loved this book. So in a Rebecca-ish kind of a way, and again, I'm sure Jane Eyre kind of a way too, Jane is totally haunted by Eddie's first wife and sort of the ghost of her, and she is trying to fit in this world, and she is trying to be the woman that Eddie wants her to be and be the woman she thinks Eddie needs in his life. And at the same time, she kind of gets drawn into this mystery of what happened. So it's twisty, it's dark, it's definitely like dark comedy and witty and snarky and twisty, like all the things. So I would highly recommend it. If you haven't, definitely give this one a go. And I am super excited. I know Rachel Hawkins has written other books, but I'm super excited to see what she comes up with next. And she had me at this. She totally grabbed me. So that's gonna do it for everything I've read in May. I already finished one book in June. I started Taylor Jenkins Reid's Malibu Rising this morning, and all I wanna do is get back to it. So things are looking good. Things are looking up, feeling good about things. But let me know what your favorite book was you read in May, or if you had like a womp womp disappointment. Dave Hollis. Again, not that my expectations were very high, but Let me know how your reading month went, if you were like all over the place like I was. But thank you guys, of course, for watching and hanging out a bit today, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.